Hi kids, Mrs. Muffin here, and I'm ready to make some art with you. For the remainder of October, we are going to be working on sculpture using clay. I recognize everybody has different supplies. That's why I will make sure to provide playlists and how-to videos showing you how to make your own air dry clay if you don't already have some air dry clay. If you already have air dry clay, like this Model Magic air dry clay, then you can use that. If you run out of this or you just don't have any of this clay, you can make clay using one of the videos or recipes I've provided on Canvas or on my sculpting playlist. Before we continue on talking about sculpture though, let's make sure we're ready to make some art. Take a deep breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. This time, let's try doing a deep breath in through our nose and then make a silly noise when we breathe out. Once you've taken a few deep breaths, your area is ready, your mind is clear, you should be ready to make some art. If you're having a great day, awesome, it'll probably get better because you're about to make some art. If you're having a rough day, hopefully this will cheer you up and you'll feel a little better about things. Our goal for today is to make at least one sculpture. I realize that most of my students are working over the course of 1 or 2 weeks until the remainder of October, so you have a bit of time to make this sculpture. Again, if you already have clay that's pre-made, it's really just about making the sculpture. If you don't have clay, you'll need to make some clay and then make a sculpture. If you have the supplies and the time and you can make more than one sculpture, please do. There's no size requirement on the sculpture because we're all working with different supplies. So you could make a very small object or a larger object. For example, a very small object, I made these little tiny candy corn earrings. I just have to add the hooks and then I'll have a nice pair of earrings. Another small object I've made, this tiny little vase. It pretty much only fits this tiny little pencil. It doesn't fit much more than that because it's so small. On the other hand, I've made this, which is a very large coil pot, and there will be a video on the playlist called Sculpting that shows you how to make a coil pot if you are interested in doing that. So the size of your sculpture is up to you and the supplies that you have. The amount of sculptures is up to you and the supplies that you have. And if you are not loving this, maybe just make one. If you're having a great time, then you can make more clay and you can make as many objects as you want. So our goal for this art lesson is to make at least one sculpture out of clay. Something important before I go on is with this kind of clay, or if you make homemade clay from one of the videos, they are air dry clay, meaning they dry in the air, and that also means we can't put water in them. So if you make a large bowl or object like this, you can't put your soup in here. It will ruin the clay, it'll get wet again, and it'll fall apart. If we were at school right now, we could use something called a kiln. A kiln takes a different kind of clay, not quite like our air dry clay, and it bakes it like in an oven. And then that clay becomes really hard, and that's what you're used to with dishes. That kind of sculpting in clay with the kiln is called ceramics, and it's nice and hard and permanent, so if you use a hot liquid in it, a cool liquid, any kind of moisture, it's going to retain its shape and be fine. Air dry clay is not like that. You cannot use this to eat or put food in. This kind of clay is to make decorative items. I use this bowl to put crayons in, and crayons are dry, so that's totally okay. Again, I use this tiny little thing to put tiny little objects in it like this, but again, I don't put liquid in it. I also can't put a plant in it. If I put soil or dirt in this, or this larger air dry clay object, and then I put my plant in it, when I go to water the plant, because plants need water, it's going to fall apart. So these objects are not for anything wet or alive or moist, anything like that. They are for dry objects like crayons or pencils or something like that. If you had a little vase like this and put a little flour in it but no dirt and you didn't water it and you let the flour dry out, that would be fine, as long as you're not adding moisture to it. I'm going to show you a few more examples of objects that I've made and tell you a little bit more about them. One thing I've been having a lot of fun making are little mushrooms like this. They make great ornaments if you celebrate a holiday where you hang things on a tree. They make great decorations to hang around your house. You can see in the background, I have some mushrooms hanging in front of my window. They just remind me of the forest and fairy tales, and so I think they're really cute objects to make. This was made using this air-dried clay from Crayola. I'm a big fan of it because it's really lightweight. It's even kind of squishy. Even though it's dry, I can still squish it. It's almost like a foam. The other reason I love this air-dried clay is because we can paint it. Again, if you don't have this Crayola air-dried clay, it's totally okay. The air-dried clay you make with flour and salt that we see on the videos I've shared, you can also paint those. Here's a fun object that a student made for me years and years ago. They put their initials on the bottom and they only painted the face and they left the rest of it white because it's supposed to be just like Muffin Cap. I said that you could paint these objects, these clay objects. Here's an example of something that I finished painting. So this was made out of the same clay as this. This one I've just painted with watercolor paint and it makes it a little bit shiny. It's nice. You can also, with the help of an adult, get something called fixative or some sort of sealant that you can buy at the craft store and they can spray it. It doesn't make it waterproof, but it helps protect the paint a little bit. I've also added, if you look here, a little metal hoop. And that's what I can hang my hook from if I want to hang this in my house, or I can use string on a tree as a decoration in the window, all sorts of places you could put these. They make great gifts, but mostly they're just fun. This was a little pinch pot that I made. If you're wondering what a pinch pot is, check out the video on my playlist about sculpting, and I'll show you how to make a pinch pot. After I finish, I painted it with watercolor paint. I wrote my name on the bottom and the date. I always like to do that so I know when I made it. And I sprayed this one with a little fixative to make it shiny. Again, because it's that Crayola air dry, it's a little squishy. So I'm not gonna put anything wet in it or a plant or anything like that. This is something I put little objects in, like beads. I could even put a little bit of dry candy in it, but I don't recommend putting a lot of food in these because that paint could come off and get in your mouth and it wouldn't be very good for you. Here's another pinch pot. I made it look like a mushroom, but the inside is blue. This is a great one to hold other little objects, marbles, coins, things like that. These work great if you don't have a lot of clay, or if you would rather make several objects instead of one big object. Think about that. If you have this much clay and you make one object, you can make one object that's about the size of the clay you have. If you have this much clay and you make lots of little objects, then you can make more objects. Here's another air-dried clay bowl that I made from Crayola air-dried clay, and then I watercolor painted it. I did not spray it with fixative, so it's not shiny. The other thing you'll notice is that it's kind of faded. I made this in 2013, so this bowl's 7 years old. It's been in the sun. It's been used to hold little things like art supplies, pens, markers, and over time, it's a little bit less colorful than some of my other objects because I didn't seal it with a sealant. Another fun thing I make with clay are lids. So I have this little jar and I put some colorful eggs in it for a craft project, but I wanted to put a lid on it. So I made myself a little lid out of the air dry clay. It's still mushy because it's that Crayola air dry clay. And then I painted it to look like a more realistic mushroom. Here's another one where it's a jar. It has a little plastic hands for a craft project. This lid I actually attached to an actual lid that came with the jar. And then I put clay on top of it and I painted it to look like a little mushroom. I had a theme going on. Here's a tiny one. This jar is full of bees. A student gave me some bees because they knew that I liked insects, not killing them, but finding them. And they happened to have some bees. So I put them in this jar and I made the lid into a little mushroom lid, just like that other one. And then I can put it on there. And it's kind of like a forest-inspired insect display. The objects you can make with clay are endless, and that's what's so fun about this project. Don't be discouraged if it's hard at first. It takes a lot of practice. I made a lot of clay objects before I got to the point where I felt like I could work with it. That's one thing I love about the air dry clay that you'll make, or this air dry clay that you might have or buy. I love that you can keep working with it. If it dries out, you can add some water to it and it'll get wet again and you can keep going. So you can make endless objects, and if you don't like it, mush it up and make a new object. The other thing I like about this clay in particular is when you cut it open at the top, when you're done working with clay for the day and there's still more clay in there, you can fold it over. Sometimes I'll put a little piece of tape there and it seals it. That way your clay doesn't dry out. If you made homemade clay, you'll want to put it in a plastic bag or a Tupperware to make sure it doesn't dry out. So when you pull this clay out, it's nice and mushy and soft, and it starts out this color. They do sell this clay already colored, like they have brown or red or blue or yellow, and you can get that kind. If you're making it home, you could dye it. I like to leave it white because I'm going to paint it later, and I'll show you that soon. But you can see this texture. It's kind of like a dough. It pulls apart, but what's great is I can just stick that right in and make my object. Another thing that's great about this clay is, let's say I make sort of a heart shape. Actually, it's kind of looking more like a cat. We'll see what happens. So let's say I make this kind of cat shape, but I look and it has lots of little wrinkles and textures on it, and I want to smooth it out. I can just take a little bit of water, plain water, dip my finger in it, and then wipe it on this clay, and it smooths out all those bumps and wrinkles and makes it really smooth and nice. It's the same with these mushrooms that I made. They had a lot of bumps and cracks and wrinkles, so I dipped my finger in some water and then I rubbed it on there, and it made it a lot more smooth. Sometimes you want it to be a little more rough, it looks more realistic, but if you want it to be smooth, just a little bit of water. I don't dump the water on there, I don't dip the mushroom in the water, I just take my finger, get a tiny bit of water on it, and then rub it on the object. If you do too much water, it's going to make your clay fall apart. And then when this dries out, that water will evaporate and my object will be dry. Again, if my clay gets dried out, I could add some water and massage it in there, and eventually it's going to get moist again. So I just love this clay for that. Remember, our goal is to make at least one object out of air dry clay. And then I'm also going to recommend that you paint that object. I'm not going to say you have to paint it because there's a lot of fun objects you can make that don't need to be painted. Kind of like this muffin cat, it's pretty much just white. And a lot of you don't have paint at home right now. You can pretty much use any kind of paint, but I love watercolor paint for this, and I'm going to show you why. So just regular watercolors like you have at home. Get a little bit of water on your brush. Mix that in to whatever color you want to use, and then you can paint it on your object. Now look at that. That just soaks right in and it looks amazing. You can even use your finger and kind of blend it around, but you can see it really soaks in there. And then if I want it to be darker, I can go back with more watercolor paint and go on top of it a little bit. It also works great because you can blend it with other colors and you can cover this whole thing. And also this paint's washable. So I'm a big fan of making the air dry clay and then taking your watercolor paint and painting it however you want it to look. Sometimes if I make a mistake, I could just take a little bit of water on my brush and kind of get it wet. And then I can take a paper towel or tissue and wipe off some of that paint. It's not completely erasable. That's not gonna work really, but you can see that it erases a little bit. So now if I decide I want my mushroom to be red, I can just paint over where that brown was and it's like it was never there. And it's gonna soak in really nicely. I forgot to mention, if you don't have paint at home, there are a lot of other things you can use to make this clay colorful. Watercolor paint works great because it soaks in, but what if you just have markers? Those work too with the Crayola air dry clay. I'm not sure how they work with other air dry clays, but that might be a fun experiment for you to try out. Don't feel sad if you don't have watercolor paint. Try out your markers, see if they work. The Crayola air dry clay works great because you can color right on it with marker and it soaks it right up. And what's really nice is I could draw a whole picture with lots of detail and different shapes because I'm using marker that I might not be able to get with paint. The markers soak in really nicely. And then look, and then look. They don't come off, they soak right in, and you could also spray those with sealant or you can leave them be and they'll be beautiful just as they are. You could also mix marker with some paint. So I have some marker here and then I'm gonna put paint next to it. If it's watercolor marker, it'll probably blur around a little bit. Or you could just say, well, I have this color in paint, but I have this color in marker, and mix them up, try different things, see what you like. I love this project because it's all about experimenting. When I create an object, I prefer to let it dry. It makes it easier to paint because if it's wet, it's kind of wobbly and saggy, and sometimes you can push too hard with your pen or brush and mush into the clay. So I recommend letting it dry for a day and then coming back and painting it. But if you're like me in this video and you're in a rush, you can paint it wet. It just, again, is kind of saggy and you might get paint all over yourself. Hopefully you found a video with the kind of clay that you're going to make, or that maybe you have or you're going to buy. It's going to be different for everybody. And then remember, our goal is to make at least one object out of air dry clay. And if you have paint, I want you to paint it. It makes it a lot more fun and unique. I'm also going to recommend, what do we write on the back of every art project we do in art class? Our name and the teacher's name and the date. Now you're at home and your sculptures might be small, so I'm not going to say that you have to write your teacher's name. That's fine. I do want you to at least write your first name and maybe write 2020 on there so we remember the year that we made these sculptures. On this little mushroom, I wrote my name underneath in pen and then I wrote 2020. Another option, a student made this one. They carved their initials into the bottom of the sculpture. Another great option is to use Sharpie and write your name and the date on the bottom of the object in Sharpie. If you're younger, I want you to ask a grown-up for help with that. And again, you don't have to spray it with anything, just remember it's not waterproof. If you want a little more protection on your sculpture, you can ask a grown-up to help you spray it with something called fixative or sealant. But the objects you can make are endless, and I hope you have a lot of fun with this. Please remember to share pictures of your sculptures with me. You can email them to me on Canvas. You can send them to your classroom teacher. You can take a screenshot on Zoom. There's a lot of ways that you can take a picture of your sculptures or sculpture and get it back to me so we can add it to the student gallery. I hope you had a lot of fun with this project, and I can't wait to see what you made. One thing I forgot to mention is usually I like to let my clay dry before I paint it, but you can actually paint it when it's wet. I just think it works better when it's dry. So maybe sculpt it one day, let it dry overnight, and then the next day paint it. Or a few days. I've made myself a pinch pot, a kitty cat, and this might not look like much, but I'm going to make it look like a little pizza. And then later on I can have it be decoration for toys or something, or I could make it into jewelry. There's lots of things I could do with it. Another great thing about this clay is if you don't have paint, you could also use marker.